Welcome back to my Ratchet YouTube channel. For this installment, I thought I would film myself caking up some yarn for the Elder Stash Mal hosted by the Stash Down Diaries. I'm going to try and do a voiceover. I've sped things up to 2 times the speed so you can watch me get more frustrated more quickly. The first skein that I am caking up is Unripe Fig by Hout Knit Yarn on their BFL sock base. It is a January 13, 2017 purchase for me. For my stash in the guidelines of the Elder Stash Mal, I have decided that any purchases from 2017 or 2018 are Elder Stash. I was knitting for many decades before that. When I left a prior relationship, I left a lot of my belongings and a lot of my yarn and craft stash behind, so that's why some of my things have only been around for the last 8, 9, 10 years or so, but I've been knitting for much longer. I'll try to keep the voiceover as in sync as possible with the video, but my computer is having some issues with the editing software. It takes a lot of memory to process, and my computer doesn't want to work that hard on a very snowy Friday afternoon. I like a lot of stats. I like information. I've been keeping track of my yarn purchases and what is in my stash since about 2020. I don't have a hard and fast set of shopping rules or stash down or no buy planned for myself. I'd like to use some of my yarn from stash and have less yarn as the years go on than I did previously. I'm also trying to not purchase any more superwash merino sock yarn. I would like to spend more time and have more of my stash dedicated to yarns from different breeds of sheep, even something just like a Corriedale or a BFL, something a little different than the superwash merino nylon. I also have no plans to purchase any more self-striping sock yarn. I have a ton of it. When I started replacing my old stash, back around 2017, I was bound and determined to learn how to knit socks after I had only knit flat for the decades prior to that. So self-striping sock yarn was a great idea for me, and I bought a ton of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my stash as we're getting towards the end of 2025, what's in it, what are my goals for the next year, the upcoming year. I went through Ravelry, which is how I manage all of my commercial yardage, all of my commercial prep fiber, all of my fleece purchases, all that good stuff. I don't keep very good track of my hand spun. I spin it and I tag it so that I know the fiber content and the name of the creator, manufacturer, yarn dyer, but I don't often spend much time measuring how much yarn that I have. So for that reason, my stash quantity won't reflect any of my hand spun. Another one of my goals for the upcoming 2026 calendar year is to use more of my hand spun yarn. That's how I'll learn from it. If I'm plying too tightly, too loosely, if there's something that I could be doing differently to make my yarn work better for me and the things that I like to knit, then I'll only really discover that by using the yarn that I've created. The second yarn that I'm caking up for the Elder Stash Mal is a skein of Black Cat custom yarn on their everyday sock base, which was a January 11, 2017 purchase for me in the colorway Nyan, Nyan. If you watch carefully while I'm caking this up, I think because it's been in stash for so long in a Ziploc bag, sort of compressed, it wasn't the smoothest thing to wind. At one point, one of the pegs from my yarn swift goes flying across the room and all the yarn comes off the swift. I ended up recaking it, trying to get it into a neater ball. Still not happy with the finished project, so I'll be knitting this one up sooner rather than later because I don't want to leave it in a messy cake for too long where the tension is all over the place. So back to what my yarn stash currently consists of. I normally keep really good records about what I have in my stash. I like to be organized sort of with my data, but not so much with my crafts or my desk or my office space. Right now I have 10 partial skeins of yarn, meaning that I used up about half of a skein, so I have about 50 grams left of mostly fingering weight yarn, and with that amount of yardage I could make myself a second pair of socks if I sub in a contrasting heel, toe, and cuff. So there's 10 partial skeins that I would like to have knit up into garments or done away with in a scrappy blanket. I have 27 different scrap yarn entries, which means that it's basically not enough for me to knit a pair of shorty socks with contrast, usually under 50 grams. I have 55 grams of, 51 skeins of self-striping yarn. A lot of that is Desert Vista Dye Works. She, unfortunately, due to health and life reasons, is no longer dyeing, but I would like to knit up some of my stash. I purchased all of those yarns because I like them, and I normally have a person in mind to knit socks for from that yarn. I have 66 skeins of light fingering and 206 skeins of fingering weight in my stash. A lot of that is self-striping yarn or yarn that I intended to use for knitting socks. I have 49 hand-spun entries on my Ravelry, so an entry could be anything, any different weight, any number of skeins. I've only created one page for it. Like I said, I don't track my hand-spun as well as I should, and that's a goal that I have going into 2026. And I have 73 fiber entries, and a fiber entry could be anything from a bag of dyed fiber or top to an entire fleece of sheep that I'm working to process. There will be some minor adjustments as I finish my Christmas gift knitting to what my stash looks like as of January 1st, 2026. I have gone through already and added in the Plies and Hellhounds sock advent that I purchased, which is 4 full skeins of sock weight yarn on a very new and exciting to me base that is non-merino and is non-superwash, which was why I made the decision to purchase that advent. So with minor adjustments pending following Christmas knitting, I'll be going into January 2026 with 169,135 yards of commercial yarn, which is up from 2025, which I didn't want. I've been looking for a decrease, but I think I mentioned in an earlier episode, I didn't do a ton of knitting in 2025. We moved, and that had me stressed out for months. Still unpacking my craft room. Just recently, my knitting mojo has come back aflame. So I'm excited to resume knitting, but I didn't consume much, if anything, of my stash last year. So that will have my 2025, like I mentioned, Plies and Hellhounds advent amount in there, and any skeins that I purchased throughout the year. I believe my only 2025 purchases were done in January of 2025. Eventually my goal, and I'll show you some footage of my new craft room as I unpack and organize that, is to have all of my fingering weight and sock yarns contained in the upper portion of an antique cabinet that I have. If my timing is still on, I've just lost the peg for my Yarn Swift and it's flown across the office. So I'd like to have all of my fingering weight and sock yarn fit on one shelf in this antique cabinet. And I would like to have all of my project yarn or anything higher than a fingering weight fit on the bottom shelf of that cabinet. And I would like to use the underside, which is currently filled with natural undyed fiber to spin. I would like that to contain all of my dyed fiber, all of my undyed fiber, everything except for the actual fleeces that I have. Everything that's left in my stash is yarn that I really enjoy, that I want to keep, that I want to work with. It doesn't stress me out necessarily. I would just like to sort of hone down on the amount of things that I have. I began sort of tracking my purchases and the quantities that were in my stash, like I mentioned, in January of 2020. I could go back through 2018 and 2017, which is the oldest date that I have any of the yarn that exists in my stash. I haven't done that yet. I'm not sure if I will. In 2020, I went into the year with 142,000 and change of commercial yarn yardage. I don't believe I was spinning at the time. 2021, I had increased my stash to 152,220 commercial yards of yarn. 2022 saw another increase, and again, this is all fine with me. I enjoy what I have. I spend within my budget and my means. 2022, I was at 166,436 commercial yards in my yarn stash. 2023 saw my first decrease since I started tracking, and I had 166,310 commercial yards in my stash. Technically a decrease, even if it's just a tiny one, and I'll take that win. The next skein of yarn that I'm caking up isn't for the Alder Stash Mal. I'm knitting a winter hat for my partner. He typically wears a lot of black or gray, doesn't like a ton of color, so I'm going to knit up a skein that you'll see later in this video and this one into a Musselburgh hat. This skein is Bumblebee Acres Farm in their Coquette Sock base in the Corsair Ghost Ships colorway. And I love the little pops of color in here. This one gave me much less sass caking it up, if I'm remembering correctly. And again, that's not a reflection about the yarn or the dye or anything like that. It's just been sitting in Ziploc bags in my stash for many years, compressed. 2024 was the first year that I began tracking my fiber entries. So again, that could be anything from a bag of fiber to an entire sheet fleece. Each thing is an entry. In 2024, I had 81 fiber entries in my fiber stash, 163,154 commercial yards of yarn in my stash, which was a decent decrease. 2025, I entered 2025 with 162,414 commercial yards of yarn in my stash and 77 fiber entries. And I mentioned during the video that I sort of lost my spinning mojo for quite some time after something traumatic to me occurred when I was on a spinning kick. So I didn't do much, if any, spinning for a couple of those years. And 2025 was also the first year that I tracked my row 1 minis. In my brain and for my stat keeping records, I don't count minis that are purchased as minis in my stash. I do count advents that are full skeins of sock yarn. So row 1 minis and any advent minis don't count towards my stash. I do have information on how much of them there are. I'm just not including it for these purposes. But in 2025, I started the year with 3,408 I believe this measurement was grams of row 1 minis. And again, if my voiceover is keeping time with the video, which is still struggling on my computer, I am starting now to cake up Mad Science yarn in their smooth sock base in the darkest gothic colorway. This was a Christmas 2019 portion of my gift from my boss. And they purchased it at Artisanthropy Fiber Arts in Whitby, Ontario. So again, for my stash, it doesn't qualify for the Alder Stash Mal, but it is perfect colors for my partner and the Musselburgh hat that he has requested. And we've come back around now to what my stash is likely to look like going into January of 2026, again with 169,135 commercial yarn yards. I have 42,728 grams of commercial yarn, 73 fiber entries, 49 hand-spun entries. That hasn't changed much over the last couple of years, and I am currently working with my hand-spun in several projects. And the same number of row 1 mini grams, 3,408. I'm hoping to have a few skeins of yarn out of my stash and out of my books while I finish up Christmas gifts for the year. I don't count yarn out of my stash until the project is completely finished. If there's any yarn remaining and left over, I will make an adjustment to my Ravel re-entry and record the new weight and yardage and everything that's left in my stash. I really try to keep it up to date as much as possible. I have a few different projects on my needles right now. Some time ago, a number of years ago, I sent out some leftover, mostly self-striping yarn to be hand cranked by a lady in British Columbia, Canada. I don't own a sock cranking knitting machine, and I didn't love the gauge that came back with that. I understand that sock machines have different sorts of gauges that they can crank yarn out to in a different number of of stitches, and I didn't love the gauge that I got, so some of those I ripped out, and some of those I'm going to just put hand knit heels, toes, and cuffs in and give as gifts to people that don't normally wear through their socks quite so quickly. So I have one project with those sort of parameters that's on the needles right now, and another one that's cranked and just needs the hand knit heels, toes, and cuffs that I'm hoping to get finished for Christmas. I also have a project ongoing that I am using a former Bumblebee Acres years past Advent Minis calendar for, to make essentially little churu sized stockings for my cats. We do an Advent for the cats and the dog every year. So they get a churro each every day from December 1st until Christmas. The dog gets different treats in his dog stocking. So I'd like to have those done. They won't be done for this Christmas, maybe for next year. I also have a hand knit Quaker yarn stretcher project on the needles that won't change what my stash looks like aside from fiber entries, because I'm not currently tracking hand spun yardage. I do have a few sort of loose plans, loose ideas for what I'd like to knit next year. I've got the Softly Slip Over Vest by Sarah O.P. First in my queue to knit that. And a cat bell sweater that I already have the yarn and the pattern. And I'd like to knit an Oporto tee by Suzanne Summer. My Ravelry queue is sort of ever-changing but also constant. There's been some items that have been on there for probably 10 years. And some newer additions that I've moved to the top as I've found new patterns that interest me. I do have some work needing to be done to my new craft room. I have some shelves that need to be installed, and I am forbidden from using power tools. It's for everyone's best interest. I am very clumsy, very klutzy. I am as careful as I can and still routinely injure myself. So my partner is kindly going to be installing those shelves for me. And I have plans to do a sort of a yarn craft room tour. I'll show you some of my most favorite yarn, and you can just put me on as background noise while I organize, probably at twice the speed. And in my video, I'm moving on to caking up my last skein of yarn for today. Sock Obsessions yarns in their merino cashmere nylon sock base, 80% superwash merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon in a 2-ply. This yarn came into my stash on January 28th, 2017, and therefore qualifies for the Elder Stash Mal. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this yarn yet. I'm not sure if I'm going to go on a muscle burrow rampage and knit a whole bunch just to keep them in a gift bin, or if they'll turn into socks. I'm not sure. I also spun up a skein of yarn that I did record, but it didn't make it into the video. In keeping with the Ratchet YouTube channel and Zero Production Value podcast that I bring to you, I had it recording in portrait instead of landscape, and all the rest of the videos were recorded in landscape, so I've just excluded that one. But I'll put a photo in at the end of all of the yarns that I've caked up for the Elder Stash Mal, and then a couple just for projects that I plan on starting in the near future. I will have a video going up in the next little bit showing any progress that I made on my cross-stitch projects before my brain squirreled and I got interested in knitting. And another video just briefly mentioning my stats once January 2026 has started and everything's been confirmed. So basically stash that leaves me between today, November 28th, and January 1st, 2026. By this point in the video, my arm is getting sore from turning my my yarn caker, and I've had quite enough of all of the tangles and my yarn swift falling apart. I'm just ready to get these things caked so that I can get to actually knitting and relaxing, which is the best part. So with that, I will leave you. I'm going to insert a couple photos at the end of the video. To my 1 or 2 subscribers, thank you for spending a couple of minutes with me nattering around in the background, and I will have another episode up shortly.